About 100,000 years ago, modern humans began moving out of Africa into different parts of the world. This process went on for about 70,000 years. 25,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a group of people managed to cross into America from Siberia. Historians have always debated the exact period these people migrated into America and what routes they might have taken. Some argue that the first people to settle in America arrived via the Bering Strait, while others propose that they arrived via the Kelp Highway. Be as it may, these were America's first settlers. In this Liber-Tea episode, we will be going to the prehistoric period to learn the history of America's first settlers. The first theory on how the first American settlers landed in America goes like this. Roughly 13,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, a group of hunters and gatherers walked across the Bering Strait, a land bridge that connects western Alaska to eastern Siberia, into an ice-free corridor that led them into the heart of North America. They were hunting woolly mammoths, bison, and other large mammals. These hunters and gatherers are the ancestors of America's native Indians. As they settled across the North American continent, they grew into prosperous people who eventually spread out across the North and South American continents. Archaeological discoveries of the recent past have challenged this version of events. In the recent past, archaeologists have unearthed sites in both South and North America that indicate that the first American settlers may have arrived here 1,000 to 2,000 years before the first theory's proposed period for the first migration. According to a subsequent theory, the Kelp Highway, as the ice sheets that covered western North America receded, the first settlers arrived on the continent on foot, while others used boats. Those who used boats traveled down the Pacific coastline and sustained themselves through the abundant resources of the coastline. This theory is supported by archaeological evidence that dates back 14,000 to 15,000 years ago that was discovered on the western coast of North America. The settlement of America is an issue that has always been plagued with controversy. When Christopher Columbus first met Native Americans in 1492, he may not have asked himself this question. He thought he was somewhere in Asia and believed that the natives were people of the Western Indies. However, as further exploration followed Columbus's expedition, explorers began to realize that they were not in Asia. They realized that they had stumbled upon a new world with new people and undiscovered civilizations. This realization inspired many questions that have lingered in our minds to date. Paleo Indians first settled in North America before spreading across the Americas. According to genetic and linguistic tracing conducted by archaeologists and anthropologists in around 5000 BCE, Paleo-Americans spread across the Americas in 3 major migrations and diversified into thousands of distinct tribes and nations across the Americas. In North America, Paleo Indians settled in different places, including the Great Lakes and Great Plains regions of modern Canada and the U.S. According to the oral traditions of most Native American tribes, they have occupied North America since the beginning of time, and numerous creation stories back those assertions. Surprisingly, there are Native American tribes whose stories recall migrations along a great river, which is believed to be the Mississippi. In around 8000 BCE, the Na-Dene people migrated into North America, and by 5000 BCE, they had already settled along the Pacific Northwest. Later, they migrated into the North American interior. Archaeologists, linguists, and anthropologists argue that the migration of the Na-Dene people may have occurred long after the Paleo-Americans, first settlers, had migrated into the continent. The Na-Dene-speaking people migrated into northern Canada and Alaska and moved along the Pacific coast into Canada's interior, the American Southwest, and south of the Great Plains. These are the ancestors of the Navajo, Apache, and Athabascan-speaking people. By the time the Europeans were discovering the New World, native Indians had occupied all parts of the Americas, including the Amazon forest. Across the Americas, cultures were heavily influenced by physiographic factors. In North America, for example, natives who inhabited the coastal regions depended on sea mammals and fish for food. Acorn was the main source of food for the Californian Indians. Natives who inhabited the Great Plains subsisted on wild game and plant life. Eastern and Midwestern natives engaged in hunting and fishing for food. The natives supplemented their food with corn, which was a staple for Southwest natives. The material culture of native Indians was dependent on the region where they hailed from. Native Indians lacked beasts of burden. They mostly relied on human carriers to ferry goods. However, in places where there were rivers, they used boats and rafts for transportation. In some regions, like Alaska, they used dogs to pull sleds, a practice that continues to date. Largely, the mode of transport used by the Indians was dependent on the available facilities. When the Spaniards brought horses, native Indians quickly adopted them as a mode of transport. Native Indians who settled in the Great Plains found a great use for horses during their buffalo hunting escapades. They also used horses to conduct fierce raids on European settlers. Native Indian tribes also distinguished themselves by the houses they built. For example, the Inuit Eskimos of Canada and Alaska lived in igloos, dome-shaped ice houses. The Northwest Coast Indians resided in rectangular plank houses, while the prairie and plains tribes lived in teepees and skin lodges. Dressing, or the lack of it, varied from one tribe to the other, as did weapons, crafts, and tribal religious, social, and economic customs. In South America, the Incas constructed elaborate buildings and cities, some of which stand to date. The Mayans, the Aztecs, Tarascos of Mexico are also renowned for their accomplished works of architecture. When the Spaniards arrived in America, over 1.5 million native Indians occupied the continental United States. The natives had a profound effect on the Europeans, as they imported a variety of Indian herbs, foods, war techniques, and rich folklore back to Europe. Unfortunately, the arrival of the European settlers ignited a brutal and protracted war that constitutes one of the most tragic chapters of American history. Using their superior weapons and tactics, European settlers committed numerous war crimes against the native Indians. Later, with government support, native Indians were uprooted from their ancestral lands and placed in settlements across the U.S. We cannot deny the fact that early Americans and their descendants were resourceful pioneers who populated the largest geographical expanse in human history. They braved the unknown and came up with masterful ways to adapt to various ecosystems across the North and South American continents. In the process, they masterminded some of the world's most celebrated civilians and cultures, and as such, the first colonists surely deserve our admiration and respect for the rich legacy they left behind. Thank you for listening to this wonderful episode about the history of native Indians. We do hope that you have learned something new in the discussion and have developed an appreciation for the history of the people of the First Nations. Like, share, and subscribe to Liber-Tea for more mind-opening discussions on a variety of historical occurrences. If you would like to contribute to this discussion, feel free to comment below.